The BIG5D podcast is brought to you by Matchcraft, a global MarTech firm powering local search, social, and display campaigns for partners on 6 continents. Matchcraft's newest offering is Powered By, an API solution giving third-party platforms access to the technology behind its flagship Advantage platform. Visit them at matchcraft.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BIG5D podcast. I'm your host, Charles Laughlin. I am the co-founder and content director of BigFive Digital. So before we get into our interview today, I just want to take a minute to talk to you about our upcoming event. It's the BigFive Summit. This is our flagship event in Cape Town. It takes place the 11th through the 13th of May at the V&A Waterfront at Workshop 17, which is a mixed use event and co-working space on the V&A waterfront in beautiful Cape Town. Really excited to be back to doing live events in Cape Town. As you all may have heard, we took a bit of a hiatus on live events during 2020, the bulk of 2020 and 2021. And we just completed our first live event post-pandemic in Dubai on the 17th of February, and it was a very, very successful and fun event, and we're really excited to be coming back to Cape Town. So we just want to put that on your radar. If you will go to our website at big5digital.org, there's plenty of information on who's speaking. We've announced several speakers, and we'll be announcing many more in the coming few weeks. Information on the agenda. It's really all about sort of the digital tech stack for small business and the partnerships that are necessary to make that happen. So please check it out, and please plan on coming to Cape Town in May. We look forward to seeing you there. Okay, enough with that commercial for our events business. Let's talk about our guest today. It's Gideon Greaves, and he is the managing director for Africa for CVVC. And as I told him on the podcast, I trip over that name a little bit. It's a venture capital firm based in Switzerland, but that has recently opened an office in Africa that's focused exclusively on investing in businesses that are built on the blockchain. So this is not a hardcore cryptocurrency conversation as much as it's a conversation about why his company focuses on blockchain and why it's such an exciting piece of the African startup scene. We're increasingly seeing businesses, not just in fintech, but in other areas, launch businesses that are built on blockchain for a variety of reasons that we get into in the podcast. So it's a conversation about investing in blockchain in Africa, why it's so important to Africa's future, and also some do's and don'ts about how to think about investing in blockchain-based businesses. So very engaging conversation, not too technical for those of you who are freaked out a little bit by conversations around blockchain, because it can get complicated, but this is not a super deep technical conversation. It's more of a business opportunity conversation. We think you're really going to enjoy it, and let's get right into it.
Gideon, welcome to the podcast.
Cool. Thanks, Charles. Glad to be here.
Great. So CVVC, I trip over that for some reason. Tell us about it, its origins, and why it's focused on blockchain.
Yeah, so I started in the company in July last year to kind of head up the newly formed African office. I used to stumble on that CVVC acronym all the time, by the way. So, once you kind of picture the acronym in its written form, which is Crypto Valley Venture Capital, and then it started being a bit easier for me, but it happens all the time in meetings. But a bit of background on the company. So they started the business, they as in the founders, in 2016 in Zug, which is renowned to be the Crypto Valley of the world. And during the time that the founders launched this business, the main business model back then, and the business had a different name as well, was doing these startup competitions and hackathons, for blockchain startups. Mm-hmm. Long story short, there was so much explosion happening at that time. It was during the ICO craze. They saw the opportunity to kind of pivot and start making investments into these startups. And then the business model changed, the name changed, and CVVC started, investing into startups that are building applications using blockchain technology. That's essentially our niche. So we focus exclusively on startups that are using blockchain in their business model. That's the one part of CVVC that's important to note. The other one is that, and we'll call it a VC plus model, as in we don't just allocate capital and make investments. There's another side of our business, and that's called CV Labs. And that's our ecosystem driver, if you will. So CV Labs basically does everything else. It's our operational business. So we have a co-working space. We have multiple co-working spaces around the world. This all started in the Crypto Valley in Switzerland, but we have a couple of those. We do a lot of events, the startup competitions, advisory, and so on. So for us, it's very important that we grow an ecosystem, especially in new areas like Africa and South Africa, where we're trying to get all the key participants that form an ecosystem involved. So that would be, academia, education, government, different associations, corporate investors, startups, etc., all to collaborate and continue to meet up and be part of this ecosystem. Because at the end, although there might not be a commercial value to that directly, long term, it gives us a winning edge over the other VCs, because when a startup becomes part of our family or part of our portfolio, they get integrated into a global ecosystem. And that's what we're trying to create with Africa as the newest office, and then Southeast Asia and India and a couple of other regions in the pipeline as well.
Okay, so you're brought on to basically build the business in Africa, right?
That's correct. Yeah, spot on.
So talk to me about where, it's a broad question, and then I'll ask this question, and then we'll go back to the beginning on some definitions for the for I think the significant section of the audience that may be a newbie with crypto. But first, let's level set on what the state of play is with African blockchain-based startups. Is it very early days, or is this market pretty developed? Kind of describe its current state.
Yeah, so if you go one step back, it would give you a good indication as to what the startup / blockchain space is like in Africa. From a startup perspective, I believe that the space is thriving. I mean, and depending on who you speak to, there might be one less or one more, but there's 8 African unicorns at the moment. They all came about in the last 2 years, which shows you the growth that we're having at the moment from the startup perspective. Most of them in the fintech space, and 5 that came about in the last year. So it shows you, how much promise there is in Africa. And from a startup perspective, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of capital that's now being allocated towards Africa. As high net worth individuals and family offices and corporates start diversifying their portfolio and look at the opportunity of Africa. Mm-hmm. Now, from a blockchain perspective, there's a lot of unique use cases that are really kind of relevant to Africa and the problems that are on the continent. I think the more developed nations focus a lot on the more speculative assets in the crypto economy, where Africa, I believe, is teaching us about the true use cases of blockchain. Things like traceability and transparency, which are the 2 most popular words that come about when talking about blockchain, right? But I think those are 2 words that really marry well with the state of things in Africa, and where blockchain can help out. But to answer your question more directly, I think that there's a lot of blockchain startups in Africa. There is no ecosystem, and there is no community where people can collaborate. So there is to a certain extent, of course, but not to the extent where there's governments and investors and corporates collaborating. So there'll be a couple of blockchain startups in certain regions on the continent that will know each other and interact with each other. Mm-hmm. And we believe that CVVC's hit the ground at the perfect time, where we have the ability to really kind of pioneer this growth and be first to market in a sense, where we can bring everyone together. Because it's very important that corporates start to understand the potential of this technology, to start working with the startups, and then that's spanning into governments and so on as well. So I think that there's still a way to go, but there is a lot of promise on the continent, and a very direct stat I can give you in terms of some tangible activity that we've seen in our global incubation program that we launched in October. Mm-hmm. We launched obviously in Africa in July. We put out a call to action to blockchain startups in Africa to apply for this program. The majority of the applications that we got for the global program came from Africa. So out of all the applications that we got, There were more from Africa than the rest of the world combined. And in fact, the cohort that just graduated now last week, I think it was, the majority of the startups in that cohort were also from Africa. So it shows you there is a lot going on here. There's definitely a lack of capital, but we try and change that.
Yeah, yeah. Lack of capital, but not a lack of, I guess, drive or native interest in blockchain. And why do you think that is? Is this for undercapitalized startups, looking at solving, financial inclusion or whatever, impact-driven mission there is blockchain just naturally a better tool for that?
I think it's an emerging technology in an emerging market that's solving very specific problems that young African entrepreneurs are identifying that this specific technology can solve.
Yeah.
And like the most obvious example, and this has been touched on a lot, but it's always worth mentioning, is the financial inclusion element.
Right.
With and this stat changes all the time, but I believe it's 23% of the African continent that is banked.
Yeah.
So there is a massive amount that is unbanked. So I think the blockchain, from a financial perspective, gives the opportunity for a lot of this unbanked population to start participating in the market. I mean, one of the startups that we invested in, called Karma Chain, they actually integrate with a lot of these mobile money applications, where most of the users on these platforms don't have access to banking facilities or credits or anything like that. They will then read the data from these mobile money providers and other platforms that the majority of the users are unbanked. They will give that data then to financial lenders, and then this unbanked individual will now have a credit record without even being banked. So those are, I think, more like the unique use cases that blockchain can solve in Africa.
Okay, so I want to go back a little bit back to the beginning. I want to dig more into what you were just talking about in a second, but why blockchain is technically such an interesting tool in this, and a lot of words get thrown around: decentralization, trustless, or embedded trust, or whatever the term being used. Could you maybe take a minute and just say what is so amazing about blockchain that makes it so important to build all these businesses on? And then I'd like to get into, at some point, what are some future use cases?
Yeah. Well, of course, it started as a currency, right? On a distributed ledger, and that's decentralized. And of course, this ledger is irrefutable, so it can't be changed.
Right.
On some other blockchains that have now been developed, if it is changed, you can see it, right?
Right.
And then that developed into multiple different things. So it could be the transference of data, the storage of data, or to track and trace things. So yeah. I think that and data is the new oil, right? And blockchain basically deals with data in many, many, many different forms. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, I think and to touch on one of the popular words, but with centralized data as we have it now, it has the opportunity or the potential to be manipulated, to be changed, to be controlled, where in this more decentralized economy that's also distributed, mm-hmm. there's the opportunity for a lot of the people to take back their own data as well and choose who sees that. Right. And that can be in so many different forms. I mean, there's so many different use cases. They're coming up all the time. One of the interesting things about blockchain is if you tell someone you're in blockchain or you understand blockchain or it's part of your career, they'll automatically think that you know everything about the space, right? Because and it's same as saying to someone, what do you do? Oh, I'm in tech. And then you start talking about this random coding language, and it's impossible for someone in tech to know everything about tech. And blockchain is similar. It is evolving so quickly. Right. There's so many different use cases and so many different parts to it. It's hard to keep.
And then now there's some I'm trying to learn, and there's so many acronyms like DAOs, and then now we're talking about Web3, and I'm like, I think it takes some effort to get your head around block. And I think that's one of the issues people have with it is it's not super intuitive. I mean, eventually you get it, and especially if you work
Yep.
in it, you get it. And it's true. It's evolving so quickly that you can ask someone who's an expert about the thing you heard about yesterday. They may not understand it. Um, so that all that said, what I'm really interested, again, I just sort of mentioned Web3. Now that seems to be the latest buzzword. How is that? Why is Web3? How is that distinct from the rest of when we talk about blockchain? Because what I understand about Web3 is it's basically a threat to what is sort of the centralized internet, right? The Google, Facebook driven internet. And this is a new version of the internet, essentially. But what probably a lot of people are struggling with is, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? And how is that going to change the lives of business owners, consumers, et cetera? I don't know if you have much of a perspective on Web3 or if you're investing in Web3, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, as an investment thesis for us, we one of the more safer investors in what is quite a chaotic space.
Yeah.
So we don't invest in like these in the speculative assets. That being said, we do have some newer fund products as well, where we do have liquid crypto products, available for certain investors. But from the startup perspective, our thesis is mainly to invest in startups that are building on blockchain. So that doesn't have to be this crazy, theorized token investment. And Web3 kind of fits in with that, where it's this new stage of the internet of value and digital commoditization. So we're still wrapping our heads around where this opportunity is, but we believe that, Web3, as it is slightly different to blockchain, or it's, they're in the same family, that is something
related, but not the same.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which kind of raises the point, as an investor in blockchain, for something that is so new and so innovative, you also probably have to be a little bit conservative, because as much money as you can make in blockchain is probably is easily lost, right? So talk about how you have to think about it from the risk perspective.
Yeah. Well, especially in the crypto space, right? Because you've got these very young entrepreneurs and teams that are putting an idea together, and it's happening a lot in the gaming space, specifically now in the crypto space, in the play to earn space. Where, I mean, there's a game called Monkey Ball.
Yeah.
They raised a couple of $1 million, through a token sale, and they do not have a game, right? So that's the same as if you look into the traditional startup world, that's the same as me and my friends having an idea, putting together a pitch deck with pretty much nothing. We're promising a roadmap, and we have a really nice pitch deck and an awesome corporate identity. And we're following a very interesting narrative, but we don't even have a product. And I mean, Cardano is not a good example of what I'm trying to say, but they have been around for a very long time, and that you can't really build on Cardano just yet. It's a bad example, but they're worth billions. But more in the startup space, it's so you can get burnt in that sense. But there are a lot of VCs that only focus on those private rounds and those private token sales before they list. And then there's usually there's contracts where you would unlock 10%, and you can unlock 10% of your investment so that you can at least liquidate some of your investment. And they have to do that, otherwise you're going to have these pump and dump schemes. Right. Where as soon as they list, the big investors are going to do 30, 40x. They're going to sell their whole position, and then all the retail investors are going to get screwed. But to touch on that opportunity for certain VCs that are in the token space, if they decide not to invest because it's too speculative, then they don't actually enter the market at all. So it is market related, but I do believe it is a bit bubbly because there's so much excitement around the space. And I'm careful when I say bubble, of course, because Bitcoin is being up and down, and Bitcoin as the catalyst.
Right. Yeah. It's actually been up a little the last few days, I think, but
thank goodness. Yeah. I'm still heavily involved in that market as well. But for us, as I mentioned, we're not heavily in that space. We've actually just made our first token investment recently.
Okay. Describe
and
it?
we will. in a nutshell, so they call Forward Protocol. We got in on the private round. In a nutshell, they're going to be they're trying to be the WordPress of blockchain.
Okay.
Drag and drop, that sort of thing, to make it really easy for new applications to come in and interact with blockchain a lot easier than you would with having.
I think
like
of
your own
WordPress as like a marketplace of plugins, right? So
yeah, correct. I mean, instead of going and building your website off HTML from scratch, you can use WordPress, and it's just drag and drop, and it's really simple.
Right.
So from a blockchain perspective, that's what they're trying to do. But we do, but the reason why we've started making these investments is because we do see the opportunity there. But we are a little bit more risk averse.
Yeah.
You know, where I mean, most of the vast majority of the startups that we've invested in don't have a token at all. It's just the blockchain technology
they're just using blockchain to build as a architecture for their business, essentially. Is that
correct? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But eventually that will, I would imagine your that will evolve. You've made your first token investment. I would imagine many of the blockchain businesses you've invested in will eventually move in that direction. Is that fair, or is that not necessarily true?
No, that's not necessarily true. I think if there's going to be some sort of like economic ecosystem or reward system, then they have to have a token.
Right.
And then there's other use cases for, reasons to have a token as well. I think one of the newer things that's coming out now is also creating liquidity for investors, where you can actually tokenize the shares. I mean, for example,
they can just sell them on a exchange or something. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, if we have an investor that comes in on our fund, you're looking at 4 to 8 years in terms of, when we're going to exit a lot of these investments, and they're illiquid, right? So there's no liquidity there for investors. So there's also a use case for that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of, I mean, a good one is one that I met now in Kenya last week called Ledger. Uh-huh. And it was such, I mean, this use case has been spoken about quite a lot. I haven't seen someone do this properly yet, and they're not there yet, but they have a really cool idea. I just saw them pitch. And basically what Ledger does is they digitize documents and then certify them on the blockchain. So it can be anything from like, I mean, in their pitch deck, they were talking about a lot of politicians that would fake their university certificates. They would have it in their
heard of that. Yeah, we've had that here. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would say, they've got an MBA, whatever the case may be, but if it's on the blockchain, then it's irrefutable, and you can see it's a matter of a fact that this person does have that. So not only is it digitized, which is also important, right? Carrying around a piece of paper is crazy, but it's also certified. And a lot of the reasons why why a lot of these certificates aren't digitized and people want to see the hard copies is because it's very easy to fake something that's digitized. But once it's digitized and added onto the blockchain, then it becomes, then it's hard to fake that. And a great example, when I went to Kenya now, I had to get a yellow fever injection. Mm-hmm. I've got that little certificate of the vaccine, the yellow fever vaccine. I had it a couple of years ago when I went to Brazil. I lost it, obviously. And I had to get it again, right? So if that certificate got digitized and then verified on the blockchain, I wouldn't have to go through that crazy process.
I was about to raise the vaccine issue, that blockchain might be an interesting solution for vaccine identification.
Definitely. And I'm waiting for someone to bring something out. I'm waiting for that to come. I think that's a very obvious use case.
Yeah, so, it struck me that way. And
but to answer your question, though, that startup Ledger, there's no reason for them to have a token. So they will build on another blockchain. In this instance, it was Near Protocol, and there isn't any reason for them to actually have a token, unless they wanted to build in some sort of tokenomics into their business model. Yeah. But that's not their plan at the moment.
But when I think about how blockchain applies to small business, or I guess I'm going to ask you to think about how blockchain applies to small businesses. Have certain. I mean, the financial inclusion piece is easy to think about. Access to banking, to lending. As a use case for small business. Small businesses also do other things. They, they manage their digital identity, or the address of their business, their opening hours, all this data that's currently, residing either in Google My Business or through some sort of listing service. And then there's, they do advertising, they do marketing, they They handle logistics like delivery and all the. So there's so many things that digital tools are being created for small businesses to move away from pen and paper and cash into digital payments and SaaS tools and all this stuff. And I'm wondering, all of this, it seems, could eventually be, and some of it already is, be built on the blockchain. So I'm trying to, but if I'm a small business owner, I've probably heard of NFTs, I've heard of Bitcoin, but I don't really think about, blockchain and or cryptocurrency very actively, unless I'm a very young business owner, then perhaps I do. But I don't know if if you see a lot of pitches that are SMB related, if you've got any investments that are SMB related, if you have any thoughts on how ultimately this will impact that segment of the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a payments perspective and a payments infrastructure perspective, there'll definitely be a lot of use cases there that will affect small businesses. Mm-hmm. I think small businesses will want to try and open up their payment options to as many as many potential clients as possible.
Right.
And if you've got like an unbanked person in Africa that can only pay with the cryptocurrency, you want to integrate that payment system. So I think small businesses need to be up to speed with the advances in blockchain, specifically from a payments perspective. I think that will be very relevant to them. Even from a PR perspective, if you announce that you're accepting crypto, it just shows that you're also a little bit more advanced, even though there might not be that much volume coming through.
No, and it may not be for a long time,
Yeah. I mean, it's changing drastically, but it will take a while. I think the big thing is the on and off ramp rails. I mean, there's a startup that we invested in Ghana, and they in the international remittance space, which is also a big use case for Africa. I mean, if you want to transfer money to Nigeria, it costs about 9%.
Right.
If you want to transfer money to one of the lesser established countries economically, like Zimbabwe, it's up to 40%, which is insane. So you've got Zimbabweans coming down to South Africa to find work here to send money back to their family. The $100 that they've made, they send it back to Zimbabwe. It's only $60, right? And now crypto can solve that problem, and very easily can you send money to Zimbabwe for next to nothing, and you've got the full amount now available. But the next thing is how do you take that into a fiat currency, and that off ramp is now sort of trying to solve that problem as well.
So are you seeing a lot of companies starting up to address that very point?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different startups doing that. There's one called Katani Pay that even uses USSD. So, those like *120 *321#, those kind of codes. Right. So that means that people that don't have access to the internet or a smartphone can still participate and use the applications. And then to go back to your question, I think another big one for small businesses would be the storage of data, and especially with all these new acts about data privacy. I think storing data of your clients, whatever it may be, if it's a Facebook, it becomes even more relevant, right? Mm-hmm. And storing the data on the blockchain, and also having full line of sight on what happens to that data. So if it gets used, then the user can have full line of sight of that. I think that would be a big one as well.
Yeah. I wonder about like loyalty and rewards, like a lot of small businesses do, loyalty and rewards programs. You get a credit for, 10 purchases. And I have to think that there's going to be someone who tokenizes that kind of thing. That may be a little further out. I don't know, but that's one.
That's a good point.
Yeah, one thought I
think everyone does that, right? Like the bank that I bank with does that. Every time I spend X amount, I get a certain amount of e-bucks, and I can use it to fill up petrol or to buy electricity, or I can even go onto one of their platforms and buy TV if I earn enough e-bucks. The same with my insurance. They have those reward systems. Mm-hmm. So I think that does lend towards creating this own like micro economy ecosystem that can be on the blockchain. I haven't put a lot of thought into exactly how it would be different, right? Because just tokenizing it is one thing, but does the use case have merit, and is it more disruptive in terms of what's happening now?
Right.
I'm not sure. It depends on a couple of factors, I guess.
And when consumers value the tokens, and that sounds like a great idea that the first 4 businesses will fail at. Maybe the 5th one. We'll get the timing and the execution correctly. But anyway,
no
that's true of it. It's always been true in building software for small business that first mover advantage is drastically overrated. It tends to be like somebody who comes in and lives and learns from the mistakes of those who have failed before them.
Yeah, MySpace and Facebook is a good example, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, this has been a very fun conversation. I guess maybe a final point would be just to give a sense of the pace of things. How different will the ecosystem be in 2 to 3 years' time?